The Radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show. The Radical. Fundamental principles of freedom.
Sorry about that, everybody. I got my audio signal all crossed out. But thank you all for joining me on this Monday, Columbus Day. It's Columbus Day today, so happy Columbus Day. It's great to have all of you join me this evening. Today we're going to talk about some economic issues. We're going to talk about how I guess the theme is going to be how to lie with a graph. How to lie with economics. We're going to take one issue, this productivity wage issue, which the left and some people on the right keep going back to and make a big deal out of, and we'll see, we'll see what it all means. We'll see what it's all worth. And you'll see a little bit of the complexity of economics. And one of the things I want to get across, economics properly done is hard, really, really complicated, really, really complex. Figuring out exactly what's going on is really hard. There are very few people who do it well. I'll give you some recommendations from economic kind of blogs that I think are as good as it gets out there. Hopefully this is something that interests you. You can also ask Super Chat questions. You can ask Super Chat questions on anything, but I won't get to them until later in the show. We're going to devote the first portion of the show at least to economics, and then we'll see where we go from there. So if you want to ask about pretty much anything else, you can, but just recognize that it'll be quite a bit later before I get to it. And if you can wait to ask, that always helps me, because then I don't have to think about your question before it's relevant. All right. So productivity and wages. One of the kind of the laws of economics, if you will, one of the great principles in economics is that wages rise as productivity rises. I mean, think about it. It's pretty straightforward. If you can go into a place and make 5 widgets an hour, you're going to get paid for 5 widgets an hour. If somehow you become more proficient through training, through practice, through improvement, supplements, whatever causes it, you get to the point where you can actually produce 10 widgets an hour, well, they're going to pay you more. And what if they don't? So people always say, well, the employer has all this power and they will screw you and they're not going to pay you for the 10. They're still going to pay you as if you can only make 5. Well, then what would you do? You would leave and find an employer that would pay you based on how much you produce. And indeed, if nobody will, then you go in and you only produce 5. You're not going to produce 10 if they're not going to pay you for 10. You're only going to produce the 5 for which they pay you. So in competitive markets, labor, workers of all kinds will bid up their wages to their level of productivity. And as their productivity increases, their wages will go up. And that's true no matter what the source of the increase in productivity. The source could be training, education, practice. Education, it could also be, and it usually is, capital. That is, now the worker has a machine that helps him produce more wages. So it's not just manual labor anymore. Now there's actually something, a tool, that can actually get him going. Actually allows him to produce more. And again, if the particular employer doesn't want to pay him, he leaves and negotiates a better deal with another employer. And this is true at every level of employment. This is true if you're just in a factory making widgets. It's true if you're a gardener. It's true if you're a software programmer. It's true ultimately if you're a super CEO. So at every level, your wage is going to be determined by your productivity. And the higher your productivity is, the higher your wages. However, the left has, over the last few years, developed a story that basically says, since the 1970s, productivity has continued to go up, but wages have stagnated. So wages have now gone up with productivity. And they show a graph. So let me show you the graph. Let's get a graph. I'll show you how to lie with graphs. There's your graph, right? So here's the line, right? You can see the line of productivity. Productivity increases. And then the light blue is the line of hourly compensation. And you can see that since 1973, there's been this divergence between productivity and hourly compensation. And the story, of course, is that who gets that difference? Because there's more productivity, which means more stuff gets produced. So who is making the profit off of that? The workers are not getting compensated for the fact that they're more productive. So who gets it? Well, corporate profits, right? Companies' profitability, that's who gets it. Now, this is a graph you see everywhere. People talk about it all the time. So even in my debates, capitalism versus socialism, my opponent said, well, everybody knows that over the last 40 years, there's been this divergence of productivity from hourly compensation. This is proof of exploitation. This is proof markets don't work. This is proof capitalism has failed. It's proof that we need unions because nobody represents the worker and they can't negotiate. And, we know that, employers are just exploiters and they'll suck every last dime out of it. So I've heard this over and over again, and it just can't be right. Let me put it this way. This graph can't be right because it violates a principle of economics. So either there's some government program suppressing compensation, or the graph is a lie. But in a market, even in a controlled market like we have today, there has to be, because there's still competition out there, there's competition for labor, there has to be a direct relationship between productivity and compensation. So I went digging, and again, everybody cites this graph. Everybody. And the right does it too. One of the things that the right cites is that this is a graph that explains why workers are so frustrated and why they would vote for Donald Trump and why they want tariffs and why they want more government involvement, because they're being screwed. They become more and more productive over the years. They've increased their productivity dramatically. If you looked at productivity in 1973 and productivity today, I mean, it's big increases. And yet their wages are flat. They've gone nowhere. Nothing has happened. And this would create frustration. And let me just say, I think people are frustrated because they've been told this story. So I went and did a little bit of digging. Does this make sense? And it doesn't take very long. And it doesn't take much research to figure out how bogus this graph is. And again, I repeat, everybody uses this graph. Right? Everybody uses this graph. So let's break it down why this graph is bogus. And I don't expect you to know the terminology, you understand all the terminology, but I think there's enough here that's just pretty common sense, simple, for you to understand that they are lying to you. And it's not innocent. Now, I think the guy who I was debating on socialism, he doesn't know, and he hasn't done the research, and he hasn't looked it up. It fits his narrative. It fits the story he believes in. Oh, businessmen screw their employees all the time. And he doesn't know economics, and he's not going to go research this. See, so in that sense, he's not lying, but he's not being honest. Because honesty involves more than just telling people what you think. Honesty involves knowing what you think. Honesty involves, is what I think, is what I'm about to say in public, is it true? Have I researched it? Have I figured it out? Have I done my homework? Do I know this is true? And it's not hard to figure out. It's not hard, if you do the research, to see that this is just untrue. This is just dishonest and a lie, and all the people who use it are being dishonest and are liars. And this, by the way, I'm giving you one little example. This is everywhere in economics. Everywhere. Everything you hear, from Donald Trump to Paul Krugman to Bernie Sanders and everybody in between, is lying about economics. They're lying about economics because they don't know economics, and they don't know economics but don't bother to study it, and yes, they talk like they're experts in it, or they truly know and they lie about it. This is true of Trump's economic advisors. This is true of the pundits on Fox and the pundits on MSNBC and CNBC. Very, very, very few of them know anything about what they're talking about. I include here the Wall Street Journal, particularly on the front page. All right, so what's the problem with this graph? So we've got a graph, productivity's going up, hourly compensation flattens out from 73 and moves nowhere. Well, the first problem with the graph is that the compensation, the hourly compensation, is not for all employees in the economy. Let me say that again. The hourly compensation is not for all employees in the economy. And it says here, if you look in the fine print, it says hourly compensation is for production / non-supervisory workers in the private sector. But the productivity graph is for all workers in the economy. You understand what's going on here? Productivity is for all workers. This other graph, wages, is just for production and non-supervisory workers. Now let's say, hypothetical that happens to be true, that most of the productivity gains over the last 40 years have happened in non-production, non-supervisory roles. That is, that most of the productivity gains have been in places that this graph is not capturing, in places that the wage graph is not capturing. For example, let's say in better management, in better use of capital, in a variety of different other in professions that are just, I don't know, lawyers, consultants, financiers, Apple, particularly upper management at Apple, particularly design, particularly innovation. What if all the productivity gains are there? And there's very little productivity gains in the other. So the gap between highly compensated people and everybody else has increased over the last 40 years. And the reason that gap has increased is because the level of productivity of the people who are typically highly compensated is increased faster than the level of productivity of, if you will, manual labor. So you're not measuring productivity versus wages. You're measuring the difference in productivity between those production and non-supervisory people and the people you're not capturing here. So you're measuring what people out there call inequality, wage inequality. Yeah, wage inequality has increased. Think about what's happened in technology alone. So one is you're not measuring what the people who claim this is measuring, right? If you want to measure the relationship between productivity and compensation, then you have to have compensation of everybody in the economy. And then what you find is that these graphs narrow significantly. So the gap between compensation and productivity narrows significantly. All right, now, but there's still a gap. Well, then it turns out all of these are done in kind of constant dollars. So they all require adjusting the dollar amount of productivity and the dollar amount of wages by inflation, by some measure of inflation. So it turns out that they use two different measures of inflation to adjust productivity and to adjust compensation. And it makes absolutely no sense. As Scott Sumner, an economist, a monetary economist, I recommend his website in a minute, says, and this is just quoting him, this is not one of those he said, she said, when reasonable people can disagree on whether the PCE or the CPI is a better price index. This is a pay productivity gap being invented by using the slowly moving price index to make worker productivity look better, and the faster moving price index to make real wages look lower. That's not kosher. You need to use the same type of index for both lines on the graph. So this isn't controversial. This isn't some free market idea about how you do graphs. This is just common sense. If you're deflating two graphs and comparing them, you should be deflating by the same thing, by the same variable. So that's reason number two. When you deflate by the same variable, by the same index, whatever index you use, again, the gap narrows dramatically. Third, and this is one that they do a lot in the studies of inequality. What does hourly compensation mean today? Well, for many people, hourly compensation, for the way they do it in the graph, hourly compensation means wages. Wages, hourly wages, $7 an hour, $10 an hour, $50 an hour. But wait a minute. Over the last 40 years, a bigger and bigger and bigger portion of wages have been benefits, bonuses, overtime, all kinds of shift premiums. They don't calculate those. So hourly wages should include overtime, bonuses, shift premiums, employer benefits. And if you ignore those, then yeah, wages have somewhat stagnated. But why? Well, because government has forced employers to give more and more and more benefits. And we know who pays for the benefits. Employers are not going to pay you more than you produce because the government is going to because of government forced benefits. What they do is they lower your wage, your dollar wage, and give you the benefits out of your own pocket. Nobody's paying your benefits. When you say, I'm getting health care for my work, no. Yeah, they're providing it, but you're paying for it. Your employer doesn't pay your health care. You pay your health care with lower wages. So again, if you want to honestly compare productivity to wages, then you have to include all these other elements within the wage. And when you do, and you do the adjustment for inflation correctly, and if you include all workers, not just 80% of them, who happen to be the 80% who are lagging relatively in productivity gains, then guess what the graph looks like? It looks exactly like it was before 1973. It looks productivity and wages match. They go up together completely. I mean, none of this is science fiction. None of this. Now, granted, you have to be able to dig into the numbers and see it to discover it. But once explained, this is pretty straightforward. This is a completely invented gap, invented by statistics, invented by use of numbers, and that has absolutely nothing to do with reality. And yet, if you tell a lie over and over and over again, if you tell it on television, and if you tell it in the newspapers, and if you tell it in debates and to your friends and everywhere else over and over and over again, people start believing it. People start believing it. And it's stunning. It's stunning how people buy into it. And again, this isn't just the left. Take an economic fallacy on the right. The biggest economic fallacy on the right now is that trade deficits matter. But they don't. No serious economist thinks that trade deficits matter. If Trump's problem with China was intellectual property, we can get to that in a minute. But let's put aside intellectual property. Let's say Trump's problem with China is human rights, what they're doing in Hong Kong. Then okay, I can understand taking an economic hit in order to fight for something you believe in. All right. If it was intellectual property, I mean, one of my favorite economists, John Cochrane, has this thing on intellectual property. So imagine that, you know, it's what's happening with China is that they are, in a sense, expropriating $500 billion, let's say $500 billion of intellectual property. That sounds like too large of a number given the trade. Let's say it's $200 billion a year. They're expropriating in intellectual property. Let's say that what we cut a deal with them is that they hand us cash of $200 billion a year, in a sense royalties on the intellectual property that they have been taking. Right? We're selling them the intellectual property for $200 billion a year. So let's say we got $200 billion a year from them. How would they get the $200 billion to give to us? Right? It's an extra $200 billion in dollars that they don't have. They don't get to print dollars. They actually have to get dollars. How would they get that? Well, they would get it by investing in more factories, produce more stuff to export to us so that they could get the dollars, so they could give us the dollars back in the form of royalty payments. In other words, the only way for them to pay us the royalties is by increasing the trade deficit. Or let's do it another way. Let's say instead of them giving us a royalty on all the IP that they have stolen, let's say they don't steal it. And let's say the consequence of that is American companies in China now have $200 billion more of profits because their intellectual property wasn't stolen from them, right? What are they going to do with that $200 billion? They're going to invest it maybe in Chinese factories to buy more American, to sell America more stuff and increase the trade deficit. Or they're going to send the money home. Let's say the $200 billion actually is in the United States. It's not even in China. It's in the U.S. already, right? The companies just get to keep $200 billion more in the United States. What are we going to do with that $200 billion? Primarily. Well, ultimately, we're going to use it to buy more Chinese stuff. I mean, what's the point of having money if you don't go out and buy stuff? And who makes the cheapest and best stuff? China, Korea, Japan, Germany. Some stuff in America, but only some. The bigger our economy gets, the richer we become, the more stuff we're going to buy. There's no There's no issue of a trade deficit. Trade deficits matter zero, nada, not. Not with China, not with anybody. So the idea that trade deficits matter is an anti-economic concept. And I'm not even talking about the moral aspect. I've talked about the fact that as an individualist, it's just none of the government's business who I buy my stuff from. None of their business. If I want to buy Chinese stuff, why is it the government's business? Why is the government deciding how much Chinese versus German versus Mexican versus American stuff I buy as an individual? Isn't it just my business? But from a purely economic perspective, it just, the whole thing doesn't make any sense. As I've often described, I have a huge trade deficit with the grocery store. I go to the grocery store, I buy stuff, I leave my dollars there. They never hire me to give talks at the grocery store. They never hire me. I mean, I feel horrible. So, trade deficits don't matter. They just don't. And there's no benefit to using tariffs on China. And I don't know if you saw the deal over the weekend, the deal that Trump cut, phase one of the deal. Phase one of the deal is, instead of Washington subsidizing farmers, we're going to get the American farmers, we're going to get the Chinese to subsidize American farmers. They have supposedly committed to, although they have denied it now, they're supposedly committed to buying, I don't know, $50 billion more of agricultural goods from the United States. Now, why is that good? Why is that good? I mean, one, is the best use of American capital now to invest in more machinery, buy more land, cultivate more land to produce food for the Chinese, when they could just as well buy that food from Brazil or from Argentina or from somewhere else, if Argentina ever opened up their economy enough? Why does it make sense for America to invest in farmland because of some artificial demand coming from China because Trump twisted their arm to do it? What benefit does it give America? Yeah, I mean, some farmers are going to get rich. But from an economic perspective, it's completely wasteful. It makes no sense. The only thing that makes sense is for the Chinese to buy what they want to buy, however much they want to buy it. Ideally, they lower tariffs to zero, but that's not the issue. Trump didn't get a concession where they lower tariffs. He just got a concession where they committed to buying X amount of stuff from American farmers. But that's just another distortion to the American economy. It's another external distortion that's going to create massive investment into farming. And it's not clear that that investment, well, it's clear that that investment is completely unjustified given, food production in the world and demand for food in the world. This is completely artificial. But that's the kind of complete economic nonsense. Complete, doesn't make any sense. That you're not going to hear anywhere. Nobody says it. Nobody goes on television talking about this. The pundits don't talk about it. Certainly the politicians don't talk about it. No, neither the left nor the right, because none of them believe in actual economics. None of them know actual economics, and none of them believe in actual economics. They just do what they think you want to hear, which is, look, I just created lots of farm jobs. I just created gazillions of profits for our farmers. I don't have farmers. Do you have farmers? Anybody have farmers? American farmers. Who cares? Who cares what happens to American farmers versus Brazilian farmers? What difference does it make? It doesn't make any difference to my life. As long as there's food in the grocery store, I don't care where it comes from. If farming becomes less profitable, then that capital will be deployed elsewhere, and that labor will be deployed elsewhere, and people will produce something else, and build something else, and make something else, and create something else. So they lie about this stuff all the time. And the challenge with that is it's very hard to tell when they're doing it because they do it with confidence. And they do it with graphs. Let me get rid of the graph. We don't really need the graph on the screen. They do it with statistics. They do it with people who look like they're experts and who come on television and have PhDs. And yet, they're either liars or idiots, or in most cases, both. And we believe politicians. Why do we believe politicians? Why do we believe politicians? Yeah, Louis says, where are they going to get the $50 billion to buy our, farm stuff? Well, by selling us more stuff. So the trade deficit's not going to shrink. And the trade deficit hasn't shrunk. With all the tariffs and everything, the trade deficit hasn't shrunk. And I've explained the mechanism why it doesn't shrink, because the value of the dollar goes up, because the Chinese still want dollars in order to either to buy the $50 billion or primarily to invest, in the United States. They need dollars. So they buy them in the market, driving the value of the dollar up. So one way or another, which makes it cheaper for us to buy Chinese goods, right? And therefore we buy more. And the deficit doesn't change. The dollar amount of the deficit just seems unbelievably stable. Because it's not, and tariffs don't matter that much to those kind of things. All right, let me recommend to you a few blogs where I think you can read some good economics. Now, I don't agree with everything they write in these blogs. Not everybody in these blogs is a free market economist the way I would like them to be. Even the way they think about the world is, from an economics perspective, is not, I find interesting and fascinating, and I think you'll learn a huge amount if you follow these things. But I'm just warning you, don't expect some laissez-faire economists over there, and don't necessarily expect them to be speaking the kind of Milton Friedman simple language that makes it really, really easy to understand. It's going to be a little challenging to read this stuff, but it's good stuff. If you want to understand economics, then these are the kind of blogs you should be reading. So, one, The Grumpy Economist. Grumpy Economist. Just put Grumpy Economist and you'll find him. That's John Cochran's website. He used to be a finance professor at University of Chicago, and now he's at Hoover. Marginal Revolution, which is Tyler Cowen. Lots of interesting information that Tyler provides. I mean, just tons and tons of good stuff, good material, fodder for thinking that Tyler Cowen provides in Marginal Revolution. Money Illusion. Money Illusion is by Scott Sumner, one of the best monetary economists today. Now, again, I'd like Scott to be a get rid of the Fed, free market banking guy, but he's not. But when it comes to monetary economists, he's about as good as it gets. Somebody says Tyler Cowen. I mentioned Tyler Cowen. That's Marginal Revolution. Money Illusion, Scott Sumner, I highly recommend. And then Alt/M, Alt-M. Alt monetary policy, that's what it represents. And that is George Selgin's website. George is a free banking guy, doer with the Fed guy, although he doesn't write primarily about that. He's trying to explain the stuff that's happening today in the world today through his understanding of economics. So, yeah, that's the same Tyler Cowen who writes textbooks and stuff. He's good. He's not perfect, but he's good. So here, those are the three: Grumpy Economist, Marginal Revolution, Money Illusion, and Alt-M. You're going to get a lot of real economic insight into what's going on in the world. They're quite technical, right? Quite technical. All right, one other story I wanted to do about economics, and that is, what everybody's talking about, wages, right? Wages are stagnating. Although wages have gone up under Trump, They haven't gone up enough, everybody says. They've gone up very slowly. Now, on average, that's true. But this is kind of an interesting point. In the last few years, some wages have stagnated, and other wages have gone up very, very fast. And it's the exact opposite of what most people expect, and it's the exact opposite of what was going on, I think, since the 1970s. So the last few years have been very abnormal. Because right now, over the last couple of years, since the corporate tax cuts have happened, wage growth is the strongest for workers in low-wage industries. Again, you're not going to hear this anywhere else, because nobody has an incentive to tell you this. Trump doesn't want to tell you this, and the Democrats don't want to tell you this. The Democrats want to tell you, oh, we're screwing the workers. And Trump doesn't want to tell you that the lowest income workers, there's just no incentive to talk about this huge, should be, success story. So wage growth is currently strongest for workers in low-wage industries, like clothing stores, supermarkets, amusement parks, casinos, God forbid, service jobs. Earnings are growing most slowly in high-wage industries, like medical labs, law firms, broadcasting, and telecom companies. Places where wages used to be going really, really fast have now slowed, and wages that used to be going slow have now accelerated. And a number of people have looked at this data. It's been confirmed from a number of sources. Wage growth among the lowest 25% of earners has exceeded the growth in every other quartile. So it's faster than wage growth among any other group right now. Now, that is pretty amazing. That is pretty amazing. And nobody talks about it. Nobody mentions it. Nobody mentions it. Now, why this is interesting, I think partially it's a decline in illegal immigration, which is causing a shortage in low skill labor, which is driving, so supply of labor is down. It's also, I think, we have fewer young people who are going into those kind of jobs. So there's a huge demand for low-skilled labor and limited supply. That's what's driving it up. Of course, the left is going to argue that it's minimum wage hikes, but that's just a fallacy, which I've talked about in other places. Okay. Where am I getting the data on wage growth? A number of places you can get this. I got it from a story in The Atlantic. The title of the story is "The Labor Department's New Report Isn't So Gloomy," very much written from a leftist perspective, but it's based on work done by an economist by the name of Nick Bunker. So I went and looked up Nick Bunker's research because I don't trust the articles. So I went and looked it up. You can also, there's also a report by Goldman Sachs that, again, the article links to that report. So you can, and they look at data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and they find growth for the bottom half of owners at its highest rate in the business cycle. And the highest growth is at those earning the least. And then if you, there's a New York Times analysis of data from the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. And again, you can go to the source. You can find the data at the Bank of Atlanta. Not everything the New York Times does is fake or distorted. And they find that wage growth among the lowest 25%, what I said before, is up. So you can go find the actual data and figure this out. So it's not hard to replicate the data. So good news for low skill workers. Not what the left wants before an election. And actually, I'm not sure it's what Trump wants before an election, because those are the people who he wants to feel continued angst that he can relieve that angst for them. But for whatever reason, Trump is not taking credit for it. You'd think he would. You'd think he would. Right? I think it's primarily because of a shortage of low-skilled labor, because of restrictions on immigration, and because of other things, because we should have massive more immigrants, low-skilled immigrants, to keep prices down. We're not. We should have an increase because Americans are more and more going into the higher skilled labors. A lot of young kids go to Silicon Valley, they become programmers, they're not doing the kind of jobs that they used to, and those are the higher paying jobs. And I don't know demographically, we're getting older. That would affect it as well. So you need a young population because young people typically do the low-skilled stuff. So you need more immigrants is the answer to the rising wages at the bottom, because rising wages at the bottom also increase the cost of our stuff. So they have the potential to lower the standard of living for the rest of us. All right, we have a bunch of Super Chat questions. All right, I answered where you're getting this data on wage growth. I answered that. But you can get it. I mean, the Fed, the one thing the Federal Reserve does is produce tons of data. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics, I mean, one of the things government does is it aggregates data. It spends billions and billions of our dollars it takes from my pocket, and spends it on statistics, data. Let's see if there's anything related to economics here. All right. Okay, it's pretty clear to everyone that tariffs only hurt. Isn't it right to harm the industry that supports a government that is morally bankrupt? But everybody supports the government. That's why it's the government. It's why it's the government. So I don't understand what that means. I mean, we should all be suffering? We should penalize everybody? I mean, we have a morally bankrupt government that everybody supports. At least, you know, everybody who votes supports it. And everybody else stays quiet. So my take is everybody supports it. So I don't get the question. I mean, it seems like, no, I mean, the government shouldn't be in the business, and we shouldn't be advocating for hurting, economically sanctioning companies because of their politics. That would be completely wrong and an abuse of power and an abuse of the government. Can you do a video on the economy of Gulf states? I'll try. I mean, the economy of Gulf states is pretty simple. They produce oil. You know, oil is very cheap for them to produce because it's very shallow. Some of them refine it. Some of them just transport it. They ship it, and they get cash. And that's their economy. And they invest that cash in skyscrapers and all kinds of stuff. They invest it all over the world. They get a return on those investments, and that's how they sustain their relatively high standard of living. Although in Saudi Arabia, the standard of living is not high. The standard of living is high if you're a royal family member, but for the rest of the population, it's quite low. It's quite low. Those countries are not rich on a per capita GDP. You know, the little ones, the Emirates are, but not a place like Saudi Arabia. I've noticed that American individuals have invented or contributed to many of the great inventions, especially in the 19th century. Thoughts? Well, some examples: steamboats, telegraph, light bulb, internet, phonograph, flight. I mean, it's very simple. What is required for innovation, for invention? What's required is thought, is reason, is imagination, is somebody being able to use his mind to figure out a different way of doing things. So the primary thing that makes innovation possible is thinking individuals. who can act on those thoughts. Now, what does thinking require and what does action require? They require freedom. What does freedom mean? Well, in this context, freedom from coercion, freedom from authority, freedom of people forcefully limiting your scope of thinking and your scope of doing, your scope of thinking and your scope of acting. So, of course, maximum innovation is going to happen in those places that are maximally free. The freer a country is, the more innovation there will be. So that's why you got massive innovation in the United States in the 19th century, because for most people, not for everybody, it was the freest period in human history. It was the freest country in human history for those people who weren't slaves. If you weren't a woman, if you weren't some other things, you were the freest anybody's ever been in human history. And that's why Silicon Valley was so innovative and is so innovative, because it's relatively free. There's relatively few regulations. So there's a massive correlation and a causation, not just a statistical correlation, but a causal relationship between freedom. But the freedom to think is the most important part, and then the freedom to act on those thoughts. And that's what you had in America in the 19th century. That's what you had in much of the 20th century in America, and that's why you got the kind of innovations that you did. And the more controls, the more restrictions, the more regulations, the less innovations you're going to get. That's why I'm pessimistic on where innovation is heading, because we're becoming less free. Was America freer in the 80s and 90s than today? Well, in some respects, yes, and in some respects, no. It was freer, I think, economically, certainly in places like Wall Street, finance, distribution of capital, allocation of capital, things like hostile takeovers, leveraged buyouts, all of that was much freer in the 1980s and early 1990s, and I think the consequence of that was kind of the economic boom of the 1990s. I'm not sure if effective tax rates were lower, but they weren't much different than today. But we're much more regulated today than we were in the 80s and 90s. Since then, we've had Dodd-Frank, we've had Sarbanes-Oxley, we've had a variety of different regulations that have increased, and we've had environmental regulations that just accelerated. We've had energy regulations that Trump has deregulated some. But no, America economically was freer in the 80s and 90s than it is today. I don't think there's any question. Socially, it's not clear. So if you were gay in the 80s and 90s, you were less free than you are today. For example, right? You didn't have gay marriage back then. So, socially, you're probably freer today, although today in the private sector, non-government sector, the kind of irrationality that pervades the culture is much, much worse than it was in the 80s and 90s. But regulation, economic freedom was much higher back then than it is today. All right, let's see what else. Let's see if there's any other. That's a good question. Da-da-dum, da-da-dum. Okay. All right. I'm going to take the last one first. Do you generally like your fans and followers? I guess this is because I berated all of you guys yesterday for the first 20 minutes. Somebody commented that the first 20 minutes of yesterday's show was me telling my fans and followers how screwed up they were. Most of them, I do. I certainly like. I don't know most of you. So the ones I know, I generally like. Some of you I like a lot. I have to know you to really like you. Some of the comments I get are inspiring. Some of you inspire me. Some of your journeys inspire me. To a large extent, the fact that I'm an inspiration to some of you inspires me. So, I mean, many of you I like a lot. A lot of the comments I see are excellent, are really, really good. Now, some of you, I'm neutral about because I don't know you and I don't know you. It's not that I don't care. I just don't know. And then some of you I literally despise. Now, I don't think those are fans. I think those are more followers. There's some followers that I read their comments and they're anti-Semitic and they're racist and they're just horrific. They're kind of the worst kind of people. The kind of people that I've always despised my whole life, and now they're following me. Go away, please. I'd rather have fewer subscribers and have those creeps. And those are not kind of people that I think I can convince, that I think I can persuade. I think I can convince certain types of lefties. I think I can convince certain types of conservatives, rightists. But I think the people who are racists or the people who are intersectionality nihilists, there's no point. The nihilists on the left don't typically follow me, but the nihilists of the right do. So nihilism, that I can't stand. That really ticks me off. That's anti-values, it's anti-life, it's anti-everything I believe in. And to the extent that I have some followers that are like that, it's horrible. It makes me feel really bad, right? So that is diminishing. But the rest of you, I mean, this is great. I get to talk about stuff that interests me. I get to voice my opinion. I get to take, 42 years of studying objectivism. I've been studying objectivism for 42 years. Not professionally. I'm not a professional philosopher. I'm not a philosopher. But I've been studying its application in my own life, in politics, economics, in foreign policy, in a variety of different areas of the world. And I get to talk about that. I get to take all the stuff that I've integrated in my mind for all those decades, and I get to talk about it. Now, a lot of people are writers. They love to write. They do blogs. They write books. I'm not a writer. I can't write. I just can't. It takes too much out of me. Requires too much. You have to be static for too long. You have to be quiet for too long. My wife always makes fun of me that I'll never write a book. The only way I wrote books is I had a great co-author who did much of the work, particularly the writing. I can edit. Editing is fine. I can do it in small chunks. I can take my time. Writing, it's very, very hard for me. I guess if I really had to, I could do it, but it's very hard. So I get to do what I love, which is talk. I get to do it in front of people who some of them I really have an influence on because you write to me and tell me, and there's nothing that excites me more and gets me more motivated than hearing from you when you let me know that I've had an impact on your lives. And then, I get to chat with really interesting people. I get to talk about ideas that matter, and I get to yell and get angry at stuff. And you guys are a fantastic audience, and you listen to me yelling, and you don't. I mean, the people who don't like me yelling and the people who resent the fact that I yell, leave, right? Which is fine. And the people who stay, I assume are the people who like my passion, who like it the fact that I yell once in a while. They get excited and I get passionate. And it's great for me to get that visibility and to get that feedback from you. That's what a teacher wants. The teacher wants, this is why I like to do live shows. This is why I track the chat. It's because as a teacher, I want to see the response of the students. I want to see it. This is why I read the comments. I probably should read less, but I read the comments on Facebook and here. And I'm a teacher. I want to see the response from you guys. And I hope this is a model for what it means for you, for what it means to be selfish, because this is all done selfishly and first-handedly. That is, the fact that I enjoy seeing your response doesn't make me unselfish, doesn't make me selfless, and it doesn't make me second-handed. I'm doing what I love doing. I'm influencing you in a direction that I think will change the world for the better. It's going to make my life better. And knowledge, it's truth, it's good stuff. And the more people have truth and knowledge, the better the world that I live in is. And I enjoy that truth and that knowledge reflected back at me. It's what friendship is all about. Friendship is about that visibility and that reflecting back values and sharing those values. That's what friendship is about. In that sense, in some dimension, you all are my friends, not, kind of Facebook friends. A little more than Facebook friends, a little less than personal friends, although I know that some of you indeed are personal friends. But it's about that visibility, and it's great. Well, it's Columbus Day. Of course, it's Appreciation Day. So there's a question about Columbus Day. What do you think of Columbus Day revisionism, providing no context and treating it as a moral holiday where Native Americans were slaughtered? I think it's horrible. I mean, Columbus, when you read about Columbus, Columbus was not a uniformly good guy. He was a really mixed, and certain things about him were horrible, primarily his religiosity. And the fact that he tried to, a lot of the slaughtering was done in the name of trying to impose Christianity on the natives. I think it's his religiosity that was bad. But Columbus is this amazing character. He is a hero. He is a man who sailed into the unknown. Literally sailed, not knowing, no GPSs, no maps, no confidence the world was round. He just sailed into the unknown because he believed the science, and he was committed to showing that the science was real. And the bravery, the courage, the foresight, the risk taking. I love risk takers. I have a huge admiration for people who take risks in an effort to discover truth. And yeah, I think it should be taught that he did horrible things. I don't think that should not be taught. But I think it has to be in the context of the age of exploration. He's a man of the Renaissance. He is a contemporary of Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo and the shattering of the barriers, of the limits of the human mind, the expansion of knowledge. The expansion, the adventure of that period. I mean, that is romantic, it's beautiful, and it's absolutely something that should be celebrated. Now, again, not all these adventurers were good people in every dimension. So that's my view of Columbus Day. All right, now we're gonna go. So, do you like sushi? Yes, I love sushi. Sushi is fabulous, objectively good. Yes, I'm a foodie and I love sushi of all kinds and original sushi I've eaten in the fish market in Japan. As the fish come off off the boats and they cut them up and you eat them and it's heaven. I've eaten in some pretty fancy sushi places. I've eaten sushi in some pretty low-life places. I'm sure I've gotten sick a few times from sushi, but it is truly, truly good stuff. So I like sushi. All right. Hi, Yaron. I'm a 22-year-old guy, and after sex, I always want to be alone. Am I just wired this way, or should I wait to have sex with someone I care about? Sorry. I mean, I'm not making fun of you. I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at the question because, the answer is obvious. You shouldn't have sex with people you don't care about. You should not have sex with people you do not have a real connection with. Now, okay, once in a while, a one-night stand with somebody you've just met, but even if somebody you've just met, you have to have some click. There has to be some caring. There has to be some common value. There has to be something. You have to care about them. If you're having sex with people you don't care about, then you're going to feel empty. You're going to want to be alone. You're going to feel detached. You're going to feel a little, I just exposed myself to a complete stranger. Not expose myself physically. That's nothing. I'm a big supporter of nude beaches. No, I'm talking about expose my soul, because that's what sex does. Expose my soul to somebody I don't care about. So I'm not a fan of promiscuous sex. I'm a fan of sex. I'm a huge fan of sex. I'm not a fan of just sex and marriage. You don't have to marry the person. You don't have to be romantically in love with the person, but you certainly have to care about them. So I know there's a hedonistic element within objectivism, or within some objectivists, not within objectivism, certainly none within objectivism, but among objectivists. No. Don't sleep around. It's demeaning to you. Right? It's demeaning to you. Now, I've said before, I think I think it should be a requirement that one has sex before marriage. One has sex with, preferably more than just the person you're going to marry. So you have some comparison. You should have something to compare it to. And certainly before you marry the person, you should have sex with them, in my view. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible not to have a good relationship with somebody who you haven't, but you're taking a risk. And why take that risk? There's no reason to it. But just having sex with people you don't care about, it's going to hurt you. So be selfish. Be selfish. Sex is really, really important. It's emotionally and spiritually a very, very significant part of life. Make sure you do it right. And again, I'm not saying you have to wait to marriage, and I'm certainly not even saying that you have to wait until you fall in love with the person. But you have to know the person, you have to care about them, and you have to share some values with them. They have to be a person that you're willing to expose your soul to. Right? And go seek out people like that. So I certainly promote dating, but you don't have to sleep with everybody you date. You don't have to. The goal of dating is not sex. The goal of dating is to find somebody who you can love, who you can share real values with, who you can become really close with. And then the goal is sex. But you don't start with sex. Sex is the end, not the beginning of a relationship. It's not the end of the relationship either. It's not the end of the relationship, but it's the peak manifestation of a relationship. It's the way you express how you feel about somebody. If you don't feel anything about somebody, then why are you going through this incredibly close emotional thing with them? I think one of the problems with young people today, partially because of pornography and its easy accessibility, is that sex has become purely physical, purely materialistic, purely at the physical level, and we've lost the spiritual nature of it. All right, if reality is black and white and objective, why don't all objectivists agree on everything? Because there's only one right answer that corresponds to reality. Well, because it's not easy to figure out what reality is. It's complex. So, for example, particularly if we're projecting into the future, or if we're talking about something complex like femininity and masculinity, to every one of those issues, there is only one right answer. But it's not easy to get to the right answer. You have to know a lot of facts. You have to have a sound theory. You have to understand how the theory relates to the facts and the facts relate to the theory. And there's lots of places you can make mistakes. There are lots of errors of knowledge. There are lots of errors of integration. Knowledge is hard. So it's not like you read Atlas Shrugged and boom, you know the truth. You know a bit of the truth, and you don't really know it because you haven't integrated it yet. You've just been exposed to it. Now you've got to do the work of actually knowing it, and that requires work, that requires thinking, that requires integrating, that requires finding concretes in reality that match so that you know it. So even if I explain it to you until you actually know what I'm explaining, you gain the knowledge firsthand. and you integrate it into your own knowledge, you won't know what I just said. Not fully. Knowledge is contextual. Now, truth is also, to some extent, is contextual, right? Knowledge, truth is contextual. So, there is only one right answer. But you can only discover the right answer given the context that you have, given the knowledge that you have. Even in science, it's hard, right? So, in my view, Newtonian physics, in the context that Newton lived in the context of all experiments pre-subatomic particles, let's say, is true. It's 100% true. But then we discover subatomic particles, and Newtonian physics doesn't work with subatomic particles. Now the context has changed. It's not the truth changes, the context has changed. So it's not like, particularly with abstract knowledge or scientific knowledge, I can just point and say, there, you see? Oh, okay. We all get it. It requires work. And human mind is fallible. We can commit errors, and we do. And it's complex. And again, integration is something not appreciated enough by people. It's not enough for you to hold the idea. You have to then take that idea and integrate it into all your other ideas. You have to make sure that there's consistency. And this is why to really understand objectivism, one has to study objectivism. It means reading Opar, Objectivism, The Philosophy of Ayn Rand, by Leonard Peikoff, chapter by chapter, and really thinking about it. It means taking Leonard Peikoff's courses and really thinking about them, right? And integrating them. And then he teaches you, one of the things that Leonard teaches you in those courses is how to think. It's how to think. I'm getting a lot of funny personal questions today. So you got to do the work. You got to do the work. And look, what to me always shocks me is when a group of objectivist intellectuals get together and we talk, what shocks me always is how much we agree. And the more we have an opportunity to lay out the facts and lay out our arguments, the more we tend to agree. Because we've studied this stuff. We've got a good methodology. We can integrate pretty quickly, or we can integrate material. And that's why, for example, and I'm not using this as an argument from authority, I'm just factually. Almost all, the intellectuals in the orbit of the Institute have the same opinion about Trump, have the same opinion about trade, have the same opinion about foreign policy. And it's not that anybody is, dictated that. It's not that any one of us is an authority. I mean, the only person who I take as an authority, who I don't disagree with without a lot of thinking, and is Leonard Peikoff. But it's amazing how much we agree on, given how complex these things are and the application of them is. All right. Oh, we're getting to crucial questions now. What is your opinion on a Hawaiian pizza? I love it. I mean, I don't eat pizza. I love pizza, but I don't eat pizza because I've tried the last 15, 16, 17 years, it's been a long time, to really reduce the amount of carbs that I eat, particularly simple carbs and wheat and grains and things like that. And I'm also allergic to milk products, not awfully to cheese, but a little bit to cheese. So I just avoid pizza. But I love pizza. Pizza really tastes good. And I like, I'm a very open-minded when it comes to pizza. I like pretty much anything on pizza. You can make me, you can put tuna on pizza, right? There's tuna pizza at sushi places. They talk raw tuna on pizza with truffle oil. Oh my God, that has got to be. Now maybe you don't want to call it pizza. I don't really care what you call this stuff. It's food, and it's good. Pineapple on pizza. Pineapple goes great on pizza. I don't see why people have a problem with fruit on pizza. Particularly pineapple. It gives things like a tangy sweetness to the food, and it can really add. Now, I don't eat pineapple, as it happens, because pineapple has a very high glycemic index, so I try to avoid pineapple. So I'm just, health-wise, I don't do Hawaiian pizza. But to the big debate out there related to really, really important stuff, this whether one can put pineapple in pizza, at the risk of Amy Peikoff never speaking to me again, I have no problem with pineapple on pizza, and I don't believe that you have a frozen concept where pizza has to be what it was 100 years ago. Pizza can be, you can integrate new content onto the pizza to expand the universe of pizza. All right, what else do we have here? What is your opinion of My Way by Frank Sinatra? I mean, I love My Way. It's a great song. I like Frank Sinatra generally. I think he's one of the great singers of all time. When it comes to popular music, I can't think of anybody, of many better singers than Frank Sinatra. He had a way of imbuing the music and the lyrics with emotion, conveying what he really felt about it, and really bringing you in to, again, exposing his soul in some way, exposing what the music meant to him. And it was fantastic, and they say, I never saw him live, but they say going to a performance of Frank Sinatra live was a unique experience, that you felt, no matter how many people were in the auditorium or in the stadium, you felt that he was singing to you. He had this ability to move on the stage, to look out into the audience, and to emote by singing that was just unique. And My Way, of course, is fantastic lyrics. I did it my way. Of course, it always has a tinge of subjectivity. As an objectivist, I want him to say, rationally or objectively or something like that. But, no, I'm kidding. I love the song. I think it's a fantastic song. It's a motivating song. It's an inspiring song. I would use it on the show as one of my theme songs, but it's a little too obvious, so I don't. Okay. What is the best economic argument for immigration? The best economic argument for immigration is the fact that there's billions of people in the world who don't have the opportunity to express their productive abilities. So they, in a sense, they're underproducing as individuals. They are not producing as much as they could. They're not creating as much wealth as they could. And that is true of very, very intelligent, highly productive people, and it's true of very, very simple, unproductive people. All of them are underproducing because they live in countries, they live in environments where the governments or the social structure is such that they're not allowed to be as productive as they could be. And by opening up immigration, what you would get is a flood of people into countries that do allow people to maximize their productive abilities. And by doing that, you would dramatically increase production in those countries, and more so production on a global scale. So in a sense, it's the same argument as free trade. The free mobility of human beings and free mobility of capital, all of those are economically massively beneficial. I mean, I can't remember the numbers, but some economists did a calculation of what would happen if the whole world became an open borders, if you had open borders throughout the whole world, just from a purely economic perspective, put aside the questions of culture and the question of politics and the question of terrorism and all of those, just economics. I mean, I can't remember how much wealthier we'd become almost instantaneously because there's so much more production happening. Just think of, people always think that if you open borders in the United States, the people who would come here are poor Guatemalans and poor Mexicans, and that's true, they would come. But even more than that, entrepreneurial people from all over the world would come. The brightest, the smartest people from Vietnam and Cambodia and China and Mongolia and Russia and Scandinavia and Italy and Africa, the smartest people in Africa, they would all come to the United States. And they would all go to Silicon Valley and they would start companies and they would create products that we can't imagine them doing, things they cannot do in their own countries because they don't have the freedom, they don't have the resources, they don't have the capital, they don't have the workforce, they don't have the people who can make it happen. Here they can make it happen. Just imagine the wealth that we would have. It's just unimaginable. So, the argument is division of labor and the conditions for maximizing the productivity of labor. And the conditions to maximize the productivity of labor today exist in places like Europe and the United States. They don't exist in Africa. They don't exist in Asia. They don't exist in Latin America. So what you want is to bring the people here. Now, what would happen also at the same time is that then people would start moving to the countries from which people move, partially because those countries would be emptied out, partially because those countries would have to change their behavior because they'd want to keep their people, so they would create incentives for people to come back. And I saw an economist, I think it's Brian Kaplan, give this example. He said, Puerto Rico is a good example, where I live, is a good example of what happens when you have open borders. So you had open borders between Puerto Rico and the United States. So basically, initially, very few Puerto Ricans moved to the U.S. because they were afraid, and they didn't know people over there, and they didn't have a community over there, and they were worried about language and so on. But the first few very, very brave ones went. And then they established themselves, and their standard of living rose, and they did better, and they became more productive, and all of that happened. And then more people came because now there was a community to join. Now there was some way to go, and you could merge in, and you could get the language, and you could use them as a stepping stone to assimilation. And over time, the Puerto Rican community grew to the point where half of Puerto Ricans live outside of Puerto Rico. They live in the United States, more than half, I think, after Maria. And they're richer in the United States. They're more productive in the United States, creating more wealth. Americans are better off because the Puerto Ricans have moved there. And Puerto Ricans are better off because the Puerto Ricans moved there. I mean, arguably, Puerto Rico's not better off because Puerto Rico has lost half of its population, more than half, and arguably, it's lost its most productive half, the people who are the biggest risk takers. But what it turns out is once Puerto Ricans get wealthier in the U.S., some of them come back to Puerto Rico and bring their money with them. And Puerto Rico has now created incentives to bring people like me to Puerto Rico. So I've left the United States and moved to Puerto Rico. So I live in Puerto Rico. So you see how, these movements happen and there's a certain balance out. But ultimately, the people who moved and the people who live with the people who moved are significantly better off. So that is the economic argument for immigration. And you can find it in works of Brian Kaplan. Look, I don't know what blog Brian Kaplan has, but I'm sure he has one. Brian Kaplan, I mean, again, don't agree with everything he says. I think he's an anarchist. As you know, I'm not. But his work on immigration is very good. There's another economist from Texas Tech University who wrote an excellent book on immigration that has a number of essays. Oh, my God. I can't think of his name right now, but I'll get you. Texas Tech University. It's age. Names just don't come to my mind. But I'll get you the name. But there's a lot of good literature on the economics of immigration, and it's uniform. I mean, almost all economic studies on immigration show that it's a massive, massive benefit to everybody involved, except the countries that people are leaving, but they deserve it, right? Crummy countries. Okay, let's put a halt on what do you call it? Super chat questions, because it's getting late. Yep, I thought I was only going to go an hour today. Okay, no more super chat questions. Okay, was your PhD worth it for you? Yes, I think it was. Somebody says intellectuals disagree a lot on Peterson. Objectivist intellectuals disagree a lot on Peterson. No, I don't think so. I mean, who disagrees on Peterson? I mean, we all are very skeptical of Peterson. I don't know anybody who has a who, for example, thinks that he's so evil that we shouldn't have ever talked to him. I don't know of any objectivist intellectuals that I respect that think that. So do I think my educational PhD was worth it? Yeah, I mean, I think it was. I don't know. If I had to do it over again, I might have gotten a PhD in something different, like history or maybe economics, or I don't know. But no, but I can't regret my PhD in finance. Not only did it teach me a lot of kind of practical economics, which I think is very, very valuable. It gave me a business that I still have, a hedge fund, an investment business that I still am engaged with, and so it's significantly impacted my quality of life, my standard of living. It ultimately, through other activities that I engaged in, led to me running the Anwin Institute. No, I mean, I don't regret my PhD. Now, it doesn't mean I recommend it to everybody. It worked for me. It won't necessarily work for everyone. Man, there's a lot going on here. If it could somehow be proved that most people were not capable of independent thought, would that negate objectivism as a philosophy? Yeah, I mean, if it would negate it as a philosophy for those people who were capable of independent thought, but it would challenge the politics. It would challenge our political theory if a vast majority of people were incapable of independent thought. Now, luckily, that's not the case. Is the Chinese government immoral enough to tariff the country's exports, specifically the state-run companies, to harm communism's interests generally? I don't understand that. Is the Chinese government immoral enough to tariff the country's exports? I mean, it's stupid. Why would they do it? But yeah, they could do it. Argentina did that. Argentina still has tariffs on exports, so that firms can't export. They have to sell domestically. I could imagine, under some circumstances, Americans would favor that. There was a shortage of a particular good, and it turned out companies were producing that good, but were selling it overseas and not in America because they were getting higher rates overseas than in America. I mean, of course, what would happen, prices would rise in America to incentivize them to sell in America. But then you can imagine politicians saying, no, we'll have price controls and you can't sell it overseas. That was the case with oil, by the way. For many, many years, American companies couldn't sell oil outside of the United States. They could only sell it in the U.S. for those reasons. So could the Chinese government do it? Yes, I don't think they will. I think they're too smart for that. I mean, they're stupid in many respects, but they're too smart to do that. It takes the Argentinian government, a particularly stupid government, to do something like that. If working both hard and smart is not good, then what is? Why isn't it good? Working both hard and smart is good. Anti-Semitism is extremely painful. Yeah. I think the videos you made concerning hijacking faith-based religion for power are the most important so far. Thank you. But no, working hard and smart is good. I'm not sure why it's not good. So I guess I'm missing the question. You're going to have to rephrase it and ask it another time. You're like King Leonidas, who's leading 300 Spartan followers to intellectual battle against the collectivism nihilists. Let's get to 300. I'm with you. Let's get to 300. I don't know that I'm King Leonidas, but certainly I'm out there fighting. We need 300. I don't know, we've got a dozen or so, maybe 2 dozen. We need 300, and we need them to be active, and we need to be well-armed and ready to fight to the death. I'm waiting. Come join me. Can your wife join your stream Sunday? Probably not. I'm not sure why. My wife's a pretty private person. She doesn't like this. I like this. It's not her thing. She watches sometimes from the other room. No, I don't think she would ever join. If you want to meet my wife, come to Ocon. My wife's almost always at Ocon. She's wonderful. She's amazing, and you can meet her there. How has your subscriptions evolved lately? They are stable. They spiked a little bit when I did Ben Shapiro's show, which, but a little bit. Not a huge spike. I was disappointed. I thought they would be. I got like an extra 100 people, I think, from Ben Shapiro's show. which is disappointing because if you take the show plus the podcast, probably 1 million people listen to it. Only 100 subscribe to the show. That's sad. But I get 200 to 300 new subscribers every month. That's down from what it was about a year and a half ago, which was about 700. I think it's primarily the algorithm, YouTube's algorithm, which is not allowing it to grow faster. But it's not just the algorithm. It's that there's just not a lot of people who want to subscribe to the show for whatever reason. There was not a bigger spike with Bernie video, not the subscriptions. To other things, to views, to minutes watched, to things like that. There was a huge spike with Bernie. But there's very little spike. There was no spike with Bernie's video to subscriptions. You're gonna have to check on that one and look at the stats, look at the graphs. I think the only serious spike I got to subscriptions was Ben Shapiro. So we're still trying to figure out subscriptions. It's disappointing because what have I got? 16,000 subscribers when there are people out there who are far less interesting, I think, less provocative, less stimulating than I am, who have hundreds of thousands of Anyway, we keep going. I don't do this purely for the subscribers. I enjoy it, as we said earlier. I will be doing a series of videos with a lefty host who's going to be kind of interviewing me, which should be interesting and hopefully will generate a lot of views and a lot of new subscriptions. I'll have more information about that when we get ready to launch those. It'll be both on his channel, on my channel, and on the RI on Iron Institute channel. That'll be released on all three. And I'd love to go on Joe Rogan's podcast, but he has to invite me. I've asked. I've really asked, but he hasn't done it. Action Jackson said, I thought that month had 500 or so. He did, but that was I think, and I can go back and check, but I think it was primarily Ben Shapiro. And then some of those Bernie Sanders and other leftist videos. Oh my God, one more. Thoughts on the movie Last of the Mohicans. Now, it depends which one. The one made in the 80s with Daniel Day-Lewis. That's the one I'll refer to. That's one of my favorite movies from the last 30 years. I mean, I really love that movie. I think it's a movie about individualism. It's a movie about courage. It's a movie about fighting for your values and knowing what the values are and defining them and fighting for them and so on. So I'm a big fan of Last of the Mohicans from the 1980s. I think it's excellent. It's excellently acted. It's beautifully shot. If you can see it on a big screen, it's great on Blu-ray. The only thing I have against that movie, and it still bugs me every time I watch it, is the soundtrack is such that you can't hear the dialogue. And it's not just my hearing, because I watched the movie in the theater. I actually watched it in IMAX when it first came out, which was amazing. The music's amazing. But it's very hard to hear the dialogue. And that's the only flaw in that movie. I really enjoyed that movie. It's one of my favorite movies. Certainly one of my favorite modern movies. I consider anything color modern. That's how ancient I am. But certainly anything from the 80s is a modern movie, and then there's 60s and 70s, and then the classics from the 50s and before, which are mostly are my favorites. It doesn't. Somebody's complaining about the particular action sequences. Those don't matter. It doesn't matter whether it's historically accurate or not. What matters are what are the values projected in the movie. Is it interesting? Is it fun to watch? Is it stimulating? Does it get you emotionally involved? Do you want to be, or is there something to be gained in being in that universe for that period of time? And I think with Last of the Mohicans, absolutely. Somebody's asking if I go to Ocon. Yeah, I've been to pretty much every Ocon equivalent since 1990, I don't know, 5. I was also in 93 and 87, but I've been to a lot of OCONs, and yes, I go to all of them. And yes, I meet a lot of people there, and it's a lot of fun. All right, it's been an hour and a half. I can't believe it. I was going to do a short show today. I will see you all probably on Saturday. I might do a show from the road, but probably not. I've got a pretty full schedule. So I leave tomorrow to Toronto, then Boston, then Connecticut, and then home. So I'll see you. I get back home on Friday night. So I will do my next show Saturday, 3 p.m. I look forward to it. And Saturday night, I'm going to see City Lights by Charlie Chaplin with a live orchestra playing the film music, which is going to be a lot of fun. And then Sunday, I'm going to a cello and violin concert. So anyway, I've got a full week in front of me. Bye, everybody. Oh, don't forget to support the show. I forgot. Don't forget to support the show, yaronbrookshow.com/support. Make it possible for us to keep doing these shows and show your appreciation. If you gain values from the show, send in a few bucks. yaronbrookshow.com/support or, use that. That's the best. All right. Bye, everybody. Talk to you Saturday.